Halloween or about the World Series. Okay. So, do you know what I love about being Jewish? We make fun of ourselves. Now, consider a couple of old classic Jewish jokes. I'm sure you've heard them before. First one. 3 Jewish mothers are sitting on a bench arguing over which one's son loves her the most. The first one says, you know, my son sends me flowers every Shabbos. You call that love? Says the second woman. My son calls me every single day. He doesn't miss. Huh, that's nothing, replied the third woman. My son knows real love. He is in therapy 5 days a week, and the whole time he talks about me. Second story, second joke. An elderly man faints and is rushed to the nearest hospital. A nurse finally tucks him into bed in his room and says, Mr. Schwartzman, are you comfortable? Schwartzman replies, I make a living. We make fun of ourselves. The question, though, is why? Because of Abraham, the first Jew. Yep, the Abraham who's the subject of this week's parasha, Lech Lecha. Meek is going to read that, chant that Torah portion tomorrow. She'll teach her own lesson. This is another one. Abraham is called by God to go on a journey. The Abraham that God promises that his descendants will be blessed. That Abraham. As we learn the story of Abraham, there is one question that comes up over and over again. Why did God choose him of all people? And we ask that question because the story of Abraham is a story of a very, very flawed human being. The same kind of flaws that are the source of really bad Jewish jokes. This is the Abraham who has a child with his wife's slave because his wife asks him to do so. The same Abraham who then kicks the slave and her son out into the desert to die. The same Abraham who tells Pharaoh in Egypt that Sarah is his sister in order to save his own life. And then does it a second time with King Avimelech of Gerar. The same Abraham who is willing to sacrifice his son on an altar for God. And the examples go on and on. Abraham is an extraordinarily flawed figure. But I think that's exactly why God chose Abraham. Muhammad and Jesus are very different figures than Abraham. But all three, Muhammad, Jesus, Abraham, are all the founders, if you would, of Islam, Christianity, and Judaism, respectively. And while the analogy is far from perfect, Muhammad and Jesus aren't quote-unquote real, at least as I understand Islam's and Christianity's sacred texts. They are presented intentionally as ideal figures, the perfection of what humanity should and could strive to become. Abraham is not, far from it. And that, I believe, is one of 2 lessons we learn specifically from this week's and next week's Torah portions. Lessons which also explain why we tell the jokes that we do about ourselves. As Jews, we are not expected to be perfect. Like Abraham, as we react to certain situations, sometimes we make good choices, like when he settles an argument with his nephew Lot. And sometimes Abraham makes bad choices, like kicking out Hagar, and Ishmael. But through it all, and this is what I love, Abraham learns. And this is why I think his name gets changed from Avram to Avraham. The Hebrew letter He is added to the middle of his name. It goes from Avram to Avraham. And so we're taught the He represents God. The point being, as Abraham made both mistakes and good choices, he grew as a human being. He brought God into his life. And we are the same. We aren't perfect. But if we can have God, whatever that may mean to each of you, as a part of our hearts and minds, we can grow as well, with hopefully good choices outweighing bad ones. The second lesson we learn is that arguing with God, challenging God, is acceptable. As we read in the next few chapters of Genesis, Abraham argues with God on behalf of the people of Sodom and Gomorrah, pleading that if there are good people, they must be saved. Now, I'm not sure that any of us really have the ability literally to argue with God. This lesson is one about both our recognition that the world, like ourselves, is flawed. And just as we have to work on ourselves, we also have to work on the world. That we as Jews have an obligation to speak up for those who have no voice. That what is right for us must be right for others. And we have not just the responsibility, but the opportunity to raise that voice and to speak for all who are other in our midst. The widow, the orphan, the elderly, the poor, the challenged, the strangers. It is ours to heal the brokenness that we experience. And like Abraham throughout his life, sometimes when we speak up, we make mistakes, or we speak up too late. Well, as our tradition teaches, it is better to speak up and to be in error as we speak than to never speak up at all. So as we enter into our people's story beginning this week, as we begin to identify with Abraham, let us recognize that each of us is in fact that individual. Each of us is Abraham. May we recognize that we are not perfect, that we are flawed, we make mistakes, but that which is godly within us permits us to learn. We learn to be better each and every day. But most of all, to be part of a Jewish community means not keeping our mouths shut. It means speaking up whenever we see injustice in any form. It is ours to rail against unjust power. It is ours to demand equality. It is ours to be the voice for those without a voice or without a vote. Abraham is commanded in this week's parashah to go to a land that he does not know. As he sets out on his journey, our text says he took with him his family, his wealth, and here's the Hebrew, et hanefesh asher asu b'Haran. He took with him the soul that he made in Haran. The rabbis asked the question, what are these souls? Those souls, they are you and they are me. When Abraham begins his journey, our souls are with him and with Sarah. We go along that same path of uncertainty, but also of discovery. We are part of the Jewish journey. We are part of our Jewish story. As we do, we grow through our flaws by speaking up, by standing up. When we do that, we fulfill the promise made to Abraham and Sarah that their children, you and I, will be a blessing. Ken Yehi Ratzon. May this be God's and our will. Shabbat Shalom.